So I'm Sydney. I'm the Communications and Involvement Manager for Cairngorms Connect. My role is all about communicating what we're doing, which is what I'm doing tonight, and looking at ways to involve more people in the work that we do through things like volunteering and events, workshops, and then stuff like social media and the website and press releases to really get our story out there and get more people involved in the work that we do. So tonight I'm gonna, should be about half an hour, 35 minutes, talk you through an introduction to Cairngorms Connect, which some of you might have an idea what it is, some of you might have no idea at all, and both are good, because it'll be a very general introduction to the work we're doing, what we're trying to achieve, and some of the key species that will benefit from this restoration project. So now, can I change slides? Yes, excellent. This is the slightly boring slide in that it's a lot of logos, but it's important to acknowledge who's working on Cairngorms Connect. So it's 4 landowning partners, Wildland Limited, which is a private landowner, and that's managed by Anders Poulsen, who is the biggest private landowner in the UK, so some of you might be familiar with that name. So that's Wildland Limited, Nature Scot and Forestry and Land Scotland, which are both government organisations, and RSPB, which obviously we're all very familiar with. The Cairngorms National Park Authority is a supporting partner. They don't own any land, but they do support the work that we do because it does take place within the Cairngorms National Park. We receive funding for the work we do from the Endangered Landscapes Programme, which is funded by Arcadia. And that's if you like the sound of Cairngorms Connect after this presentation, you could have a look at the other projects that the Endangered Landscapes Programme fund, because they're all very similar, landscape scale, really ambitious habitat restoration projects right across Europe. And we are also an actor for the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. So what area am I talking about? Anne mentioned that we're within the Cairngorms. So you can see here that also is probably the most English pronunciation of the Cairngorms, but I am English, but I do live in Scotland now. So we're up here in the north of Scotland within the Cairngorms National Park. This map on the inset, I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, maybe not, but we're the slightly dark green area within the light green area of the Cairngorms National Park. And this bigger map gives you a bit of an idea of how the land is managed and by who. So we've got RSPB Abernethy, which I'm sure is a familiar name for lots of you. That's this light blue shape up here in the top right, spreading down into Glenmore Forest Park, into Invereshie and Intriac National Nature Reserve, this pink and green shape, RSPB Inch Marshes, which again might be a familiar name to a lot of you, and then down into this big dark blue shape, which is Glenfishie. So you can tell from looking at the map that when these landowners got together in around 2014 and had a look at a map, it was pretty obvious that they were all doing quite similar work right next to each other. And instead of kind of carrying on as individual landowners and kind of carrying on their own individual reserves, they could work together and work at a landscape scale to deliver habitat restoration for a huge range of species, and bring multiple benefits to the area by working together and working at this landscape scale. Which does just make sense. I sort of wonder why it didn't happen earlier, because when you look at a map, it is so obvious that all these reserves are doing really similar work. So of course they should be collaborating and working together. Our office is based in Aviemore. Sorry, did someone say something? Can you hear me okay? Or no? Just checking. Grand. So this map, as useful as it is, probably doesn't paint a very interesting picture of the actual landscape I'm talking about. So I'm just going to show a couple of images that demonstrate what this map looks like in real life. So this is on Glenfishie Reserve. So this was in the big blue shape in the bottom left-hand corner. This is owned by Wildland, and it's often referred to as the jewel in the crown of the Cairngorms. And you can kind of tell, even just from this image, it is this really beautiful example of a really wild Scottish landscape. You've got this beautiful braided river channel right down the middle. You've got these naturally regenerating forests coming up the side. There is a little bothy in this picture you can see as well, which is a nice place to stay if you're in, well, nice-ish place to stay if you're ever in the area. But yeah, it's a magical landscape, and a really exciting vision for what Scotland could and should look like. Cairngorms Connect also includes RSPB Abernethy, which is this huge expanse of Caledonian, a huge expanse of native woodland that contains the largest remaining remnants of ancient Caledonian pine. So these beautiful old gnarled granny pines that kind of twist and turn, and have been around for the last 200 years and will hopefully be around for the next 200 years. It's also home to some really special, quite iconic Scottish species. So obviously on the screen you've got a red squirrel. I'm very excited by red squirrels, having grown up in London and never really seeing them, and then here it just feels like they're everywhere. So I'm a big fan of red squirrels, and obviously crested tits with their little cheeky Mohican. I'm a big fan as well. So Abernethy Forest is this huge expanse of forest, which you can kind of tell from this image. It really does sort of stretch as far as the eye can see, and is a really special place for wildlife and for the people who live and work throughout the forest. We've also got within the partnership area, I think this is Ben Macdui or possibly Cairngorm. We've got some really high altitude mountains as well. So as you can imagine, these are home to some really special species that very few people get to see in the UK. So right at the kind of tops of the mountains, we've got ptarmigan, which is this white bird on the right of the two, if you're not familiar with ptarmigan. I mean, every species we talk about, I'm going to say that's a really special species because I think they all are great. But this wonderful bird, which changes the colour of its plumage, so it's white to blend in with the snow during the winter, and then kind of a lighter brown to blend in with the no snow during the summer. So a really cool bird. And then on the left, you've got the dotterel, which is an alpine species that nests in the Cairngorms. I don't know if anyone's seen one. I still haven't, but fingers crossed for this year. And it's one of the few species of bird where the female bird is a bit more flamboyant and is kind of the flashier species compared to the male. Normally it's the male, obviously, that's a bit flashier and more colourful, but in dotterel, that's the female, which is one of the other reasons I think they're really cool. So within this area, there are over 5,000 recorded species, which includes a whole range of things. This pictured in this image is white-tailed eagles. So last summer was the first year we were able to get a tiny camera, which was very carefully placed in a twig next to their nest before they nested there, obviously, so we didn't risk disturbing them. And we managed to get this really close-up live stream view of a white-tailed eagle nest within the Cairngorms Connect area, and that was live streamed to the Lochgarten Nature Centre. So visitors to the area were able to go to the nature centre and get this really special look at a white-tailed eagle nest, which most people sort of would never ever get to see. And to see that live as the eagles were out there in their nest it was really special. There was a lot of worries and concerns that they were gonna be bringing back kind of dead lambs and stuff like that, and we were going to have that live streamed to visitors in the centre. That didn't happen, which was a real relief, and it was a really special experience for everyone who got to see it. I do have some clips from that which I'll send out after this, so you can have a look at some of the videos from that nest, not just this image. But yeah, that was a really cool experience, and as we kind of work to restore the Cairngorms Connect landscape, I think we'll only see more species like white-tailed eagles and more pairs of them, which would be excellent. Capercaillie is a big species for us up here, as I'm sure you can imagine. There's hardly any at all left in the UK, and the ones that are left are predominantly within the Cairngorms Connect landscape. So we've got, it's not what we've got, but the Cairngorms Connect landscape contains over 50% of the remaining Capercaillie population. It's a population that's been in decline. I'm sure you're all sort of familiar with the story. It's a real, it is a sad story of habitat loss and climate change and disturbance causing Capercaillie numbers to just plummet. And they're an amazing bird. This image shows the females and some youngish males. and this was taken on a camera trap last summer. So we're doing a lot of work to protect and restore capercaillie populations, and this camera trap image was from a project where loads of camera traps were placed out at various areas across the Cairngorms Connect landscape to get a closer look at capercaillie broods and lek sites, to try and get a more accurate picture of how many we have left, because we're not really sure, to be honest. They're very prone to disturbance, so it's, when we're counting capercaillie, it's obviously really important that we're not disturbing them and risking disturbing their breeding. So camera traps helped us get this sort of inside scoop without any risk of people kind of being noisy and out there in the forest disturbing them and preventing them from breeding. So again, I've got some other camera trap footage showing videos showing the capercaillie kind of I'm not sure what it's called when they sort of circle around in dust paths, but some really cool camera trap footage which I can share with you all as well. So not only is the Cairngorms Connect landscape really important for loads of rare and endangered species, it's also a really important place for people, which is more around the work that I do. So the partnership employs nearly 60 full-time equivalent staff, making it a really important employer in the local economy. There are also a huge number of visitors to this area of the national park every year. We calculate it's nearly 2 million a year. So it's a huge number of people coming in who want to experience this wildlife, or go mountain biking and wild swimming, and all the things there are to do in the Cairngorms National Park. So it's a really important place for nature, but we've got to be sure we're balancing that with the needs of people and making sure it's a balance, because it is, it's a hugely popular area for people, and you can understand why. So we do a lot of work to engage audiences with the work that we're doing, to talk to them about this landscape and how important and special it is, and the work that we're doing to get more people kind of understanding what we're doing and get them supportive and seeing the value in this landscape. So this is from a local youth group who came out with us to RSPB Abernethy. They were very excited to get in the trailer. I think that trumped everything else we did. They just wanted a ride in the trailer, which was fair enough. But this is them visiting our herd of cattle, with Mike at the back, who's our warden, who manages the herd of cattle. And these cattle are out in the forest, and their job, if you call it their job, is to trample down the vegetation and keep the vegetation in the heather low to give blaeberry a chance to grow, which is a key food source for capercaillie. So these cattle are out there all not all year, they do have a break, but for a lot of the year, creating these kind of perfect capercaillie conditions. And it looks like it's working, which is really exciting, because it's a really, it's easy for us. We just sort of get the cows out there and the cows do all the hard work. But it's a more kind of natural approach to habitat management, getting these large herbivores in to manage the habitat for us, essentially. So what we actually do is, I've talked about habitat restoration a lot. We call it habitat restoration. Some people call it rewilding, which is not a word we like to use for various reasons, which we can chat about later. But essentially it means giving the landscape, giving these ecosystems a chance to restore and to get better and to be a bit more natural, and to take out any kind of damage that humans have done in the past that are preventing these ecosystems for behaving as they normally would. So we do, and I'll go through each of these in a bit more detail, but we do a lot of peatland restoration, we do forest restoration, and we do floodplain and river restoration. So peatland restoration is it's restoring peatlands, what it says on the tin. So we've got these amazing areas of quite high altitude peatlands, and around 10,000 hectares of peatlands right across the Cairngorms Connect landscape. They tend to be quite high altitude, so they're not the easiest to access. It's often a full day out in a 4x4 and a hike for several kilometres if you want to get to some of our peatland sites. But some of them are in quite bad condition. So in this image you can see where the vegetation has come off the peat and it's just bare brown peat exposed to the air. You get this then negative feedback loop of because the peat's exposed, it's then getting washed off, it's getting blown away, it's getting trampled by deer and run off the hill. So it gets worse and worse and worse. So we're doing a lot of work to cover up any exposed peat to kind of keep it locked in, so it doesn't wash away and blow away, and also to block drains and gullies where water's kind of rushing off the peatland and washing a lot of the peat off. But if we block those drains, keep the water within the peatland, keep the moss nice and soggy, keep the bog nice and boggy. So that's our sort of peatland restoration work, and we're working with the Cairngorms National Park Authority Peatland Action Team to deliver a lot of this work. And you can see in this background image this sort of trail of I'm not sure what you'd call it, maybe you'd call that a gully, with these piles of stones in it. So we were putting stones in these rivers that are flowing off the peatland to block them and keep the water retained high in the catchment. And as I'm sure you'll know, peatlands are a very special habitat for a lot of really cool species. Before I worked for Cairngorms Connect, I worked up at RSPB Forsenard, doing a lot of peatland restoration up there. So these peatland species are, very close to my heart. Species like golden plover, which I know you were talking about earlier, which is a nice connection. So that's the bird on the left, this beautiful, it's just a really lovely bird, and a really lovely kind of peeping, mournful call that carries out across the peatlands when you're up at these sites. Hen harriers as well, very important. That's the picture in the middle. And then these tiny plants, not as big as the golden plover, even though this picture sort of would present them as that. These tiny carnivorous plants called sundew, which some of you, I'm sure lots of you will know about. But these, beautiful insect-eating tiny plants that grow in healthy peatlands. So the aim is to restore peatlands and make them a better habitat for all these species and lots more. And to be able to, healthy peatlands store carbon, so they're also a really useful tool in the fight against the climate crisis. Bog woodland is again pretty much what it says on the tin. It's woodland within boggy areas. So it's a very rare habitat in the UK. It wasn't one I was that familiar with before I started this job. But it's essentially, these really lovely wet boggy areas of woodland where the soil is so nutrient poor that the trees can only grow very slowly and still only grow very small. So this tree on the left might look very young, but that could be as old as the trees at the back, which are kind of look fully grown and look what we understand fully grown trees to look like. And this is a really special habitat for especially species of dragonfly and damselfly. These lovely, sort of woody, boggy glades. A really special habitat. A lot of the work we're doing on bog woodland is about, again, keeping them wet, keeping them soggy. In the past, people have attempted to drain them to plant more trees for kind of timber production, which never really worked because the soils of not very good quality for growing trees. But it does mean we've been left with these drains next to bog woodland, which are draining the bog woodland. So we're blocking them. It's a pretty easy task, just kind of filling them with dirt basically and plugging them up so it keeps the water in the bog woodland and keeps them nice and wet. Floodplain restoration is our next big project. This is RSPB Inchmarsh's floodplain, which might be familiar with lots of you. It's often called one of the most natural floodplains in the UK. It probably won't surprise you to know that it's not very natural at all. There have been lots of modifications made to this floodplain. You can see in the left-hand corner these kind of really straight, sort of silver-looking lines of water. So these are where people have attempted to create these straight, narrow rivers to keep the water rushing straight through the floodplain to create land for agriculture, which never really worked because it's a floodplain. And we sort of know that now, but at the time that was what the attempts were made for. There've also been, you can this picture isn't very good for it, but they've also built these kind of embankment walls along the rivers and along the tributaries leading into the floodplain to again keep the water straight and narrow and straight on rather than flooding out into the floodplain, which is what it should be doing, because then it stores the water and lets it out slowly rather than it all rushing off and causing a bit of a flood risk. So we're doing a lot of work to restore this floodplain. It's been a long process so far. We've done a lot of work to work with local communities to talk to them about what they'd like to see on the floodplain and match that up with how we want to manage the floodplain, because when we're talking about flooding, it's obviously quite a, people are very worried their houses are going to flood, rightly so. So we're doing a lot of work with them to make sure that they understand that the work that we're doing is not going to flood their homes. It's actually probably going to improve flood risk locally, which is great. If any of you have been to Inch Marshes, you might be familiar with some of the species we find there. Curlew on the left is a key one, another one of my favourite species, probably because you also find them on peatlands. But RSPB Inch Marshes is a really important place for curlew, and we do a lot of work throughout the breeding season with curlew on Inch Marshes. So soon, I think around March, end of March, April time, we'll have a whole team of volunteers who are out monitoring curlew nests, which does just sound like the coolest job in the world, just keeping an eye on nests and watching for chicks. And there's, I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but huge numbers of curlew that breed at Inch Marshes. And again, they've got a really beautiful call, that kind of, I'm not going to attempt to do it. I was trying last week to do a curlew noise and it was very unsuccessful, so I won't try that again. It's also very important for hooper swans. So this image in the middle, a really beautiful swan, and they come here in the winter in their sort of hundreds and thousands. That number might not be quite right. But yeah, really another great noise from a bird, actually, hooper swans, which I'm not going to do. And then on the far right, this is a spotted crake, which is so rare I couldn't even find a photo of it, so we've just got this illustration. But that's another bird you might be able to spot at Inch Marshes. And again, I've never seen it, so I'm slightly suspicious when people say they do, but I know, I'm sure they're there. Forest restoration is our biggest project, and we have an overall ambition to double the forest in size over 200 years, which might sound a bit bonkers, and it sometimes does feel a bit bonkers, but that's based on a lot of science which shows that where the forest could and should be in the Cairngorms. So it's all based on fact. It's what we should have here in Scotland. We should have much bigger forests, expanding kind of right up the hills, which we just don't have at the moment. So we're doing a lot of work to double the forest in size through kind of two main approaches. Number one, through deer control and deer management, which gives forests a chance to grow, gives these new native woodlands a chance to establish. And I'll talk a bit more about deer management in a bit, and also improving the quality of existing forests. No, wrong picture. Okay, so improving the quality of existing forests is around creating better diversity in the forests that we do have. So a lot of forests in the area were planted for timber production. So it's lots of Scots pines, which were all planted at the same time, very close to each other. So they didn't have much space to kind of grow into these beautiful granny pines that we imagine when we think of Scots pines. So they're all very straight, narrow, quite weak. Even for timber production, they weren't great. So we do a lot of work to go into forests and essentially cut down some of these trees to give the other ones spaces to grow, which is, might sound counterproductive, cutting down trees for conservation, but it's an important part of returning the forest to what it should be in a more natural state and giving the forest a chance to recover. I talked about expanding the forest to its natural limit, which also needs a bit of help from us. So it is mainly done through natural regeneration, but there are some species, particular broadleaf species or montane scrub, which need a bit of help because there's no seed source, or they'll just really struggle to re-establish without our help. So this picture is from our willow walk, where we carry thousands of downy willow saplings up into the Cairngorms. You can just see them poking out of people's backpacks and various shopping bags that people had with them. So we carried these saplings in, planted them in the Cairngorms, and they'll eventually form this habitat known as montane scrub, which is something we just don't have at all in Scotland or anywhere in the UK. If we look at similar climates in places like Norway, it's a prolific habitat. And it's what we should have in Scotland, this kind of scrubby habitat right at the edge of the forest, high up on the hills, that has these tiny kind of willow and birch and broadleaf species that only grow to about knee height because they're so exposed, and the conditions are so hard, but they are a habitat we should have in Scotland. And you can see, so the photo on the left shows you one of the, I think that's a rowan. So a rowan growing up, it's made its way past nibbling deer, and will be, soon this landscape could be full of these really special trees, and home to species like bluethroat, which would be amazing. I would love to see a bluethroat in the Cairngorms. It won't happen for a while. We're obviously working towards a really long-term vision over 200 years. So it might not be in my lifetime, but it's still hoping for a better future, and a future where visitors to the Cairngorms will be able to go out and see a bluethroat, which, I think would be fantastic. I'm very jealous, frankly. Oh no, here's my restructuring plantations. So I've already talked about this, but this is essentially going into the forest and removing some of the trees to create space for the others to grow properly. And you can see in this image what it looks like, kind of creating these glades, which are really important for species like capercaillie to be able to come out and leck in. One of the comments we sometimes get is that visitors say it looks a bit messy, and they're not so keen on it because they think it looks like a bit of a mess, which is understandable. You can sort of see from this picture it is a bit messy when you've got all these kind of trees lying blown over in the forest, but actually nature loves mess, and we've sort of come to a place where we want everything to be neat and tidy and orderly, and that's not always the best for nature. That's not always what species like capercaillie need. So it is about going in and creating a bit of a mess sometimes. This, I mentioned, we create, essentially go in and cut down trees, but we also go into these plantation woodlands and effectively kill trees as they stand. So this is called ring barking, which is, cutting away at the outer layer of bark to essentially kill the tree as it stands, and create standing deadwood, which is then used by woodpecker for nesting in. We've got some deep in the forest, we've got some swifts nesting in standing deadwood, which, before, again, growing up in London, I thought swifts nested in houses, and it's obvious when you think about it. Of course, they would once have nested in trees, but we just don't really have the habitat for them. So going in and creating this habitat that's a bit more natural, supports a wider range of species, and obviously is a good employment opportunity for lots of local people as well. So we hire a lot of local contractors to go out and do this ring barking work and forest restructuring work. We've also got a big task ahead of us in the removal of non-native conifers. So in the 18th and 19th century, a lot of non-native conifer species were planted in the area for timber production, and a lot of them, like Sitka spruce and lodgepole pine, can grow much faster than our native Scots pine. They can reach the light quicker and kind of block out the light and prevent Scots pine and our native woodland and our native species of broadleafs from flourishing, basically. So we've got a lot of work to do to remove these non-native conifers. This is a volunteer work party going in and removing non-natives, which is actually, it is a really nice way to get people out in the landscape and kind of practically helping with the work that we're doing. It is always really popular with volunteers. I think I've done it so much, I'm a bit sick of it now. It just feels like an endless task, but we will get there. And obviously the work we're doing to restore forests, the native woodland that we've got, will help with this work as well. I've already mentioned deer management, so I'll just talk about that in a bit more detail. So one of the biggest threats to these young native woodlands that we're trying to restore is the really high numbers of deer we have in Scotland. They are a natural part of Scotland's ecosystem, so they should be here. It's just the numbers we have at the moment are so unsustainable. They're so high. It just means that they're nibbling absolutely everything, and not giving any trees or forests a chance to recover. So we do a lot of work on deer management. We've got stalkers out in the landscape right throughout the year, not just killing deer, but also acting in the role of a predator, so keeping the deer moving across the landscape, making sure they don't all congregate in one spot and eat a forest and then there's no tiny forest left, eat all our downy willows that we planted out. So it's not, it's about acting in the absence of large predators in Scotland. It's our responsibility to step into that role of natural predator, where once we would have had wolves and lynx. Obviously we don't have those anymore. Deer management is something that initially when I started, the partners were quite nervous to talk about. I think it can be quite a contentious issue for a variety of reasons, but we wanted to kind of change that and use it as an opportunity to get more people involved in the work that we're doing. And a really good way of doing that is through venison. So we now produce Cairngorms Connect venison. We run events to talk to local communities about the work that we're doing over a locally sourced venison burger or sausage. And if you do choose to eat meat, venison, locally sourced, sustainable wild venison is the number one choice, really. It's got very low carbon footprint, very low food miles. It's work that we're doing anyway. We would be out in this landscape controlling deer, so we wanted to turn that into a positive and use it to produce venison, which we now sell locally. If you do visit the area this summer, it will be on sale at the RSPB Lochgarten Nature Centre, which used to be the Osprey Centre, which might be more familiar to you, but it's recently changed its name to Nature Centre. So yes, I would love for everyone to try some Cairngorms Connect venison, which has been really popular. I think at a time people are becoming a lot more conscious of their kind of consumer habits and wanting to make kind of good choices with the food that they eat. So if you do choose to eat meat, venison is a really good option. And this image is from a big event we ran last year called Hill to Grill, which was all about telling the story of venison from hill to grill. We were very pleased with that name, as you can tell. Just the last couple of slides now, just to briefly touch on, we're obviously doing a huge amount of work in the area over a huge scale. 60,000 square kilometers. Nope, sorry, that's wrong. 600 square kilometers. That would be crazy. Which is roughly, I think, six times the size of Bristol. So it's a huge area, and we're investing a lot of money in this work as well. So it's important that we know it's working, and it's important that we monitor the impacts of the work that we're doing, both on the species that live here, but also on local people and the local economy. To have, really kind of interrogate the impacts of habitat restoration and make sure it is a good thing. So this image is from our monitoring team, who are out in the summer camping at all different places right across the partnership area doing moth trapping. So this Ellie on the left, she's amazing. She'll be hiking out in the Cairngorms, setting up her moth trap, camping next to it, sometimes at the top of mountains, sometimes in forests, right across the landscape. And then waking up with the sun, which in the summer can be around 3 or 4 a.m, and sorting through a moth trap to see what moth species she finds. And moths were chosen as a key indicator species because they can be very specific about the habitat they want to live in and the food they want to eat. So they can tell us a lot about the changing landscape, because if you get a specific moth, you'll know there's a specific tree or a specific habitat in the area. I've been out with her a couple of times and helped out and kind of taken images and got video content. And it does sound lovely. There were a lot of midges, so I did struggle. I don't know how she does it, but it's a really special experience. And this summer we're going to be working with volunteers as well to get them trained up to be able to go out and do camping and moth trapping, which for a lot of people is kind of the dream volunteering role. So that's fantastic to be able to get more people involved with that. That is the end of my presentation. I'll stop talking now. I've put my email address there and our social media contacts, so I can share that with Anne as well, if anyone's got any questions that they'd rather email, or obviously happy to have a chat now. Thank you very much.
The first question we've got, Sydney, is do you think that wolves or lynx will ever be released in the Cairngorm to help deer management populations?
Yeah, it's a big question. I do get asked it a lot. So a very good question. It's I Cairngorms Connect is not willing to take the lead on that project, is the official answer. It's not something we're looking at doing. We'd rather focus on kind of restoring the habitat as best we can, and with the best science available, rather than focusing in on specific species. I think, particularly with wolves and lynx, it's not so much an ecological issue, it's much more a social and cultural issue. It would be a huge project to make sure that everyone in the area was kind of supportive and comfortable and properly understood what it would mean to reintroduce wolves or lynx. So it's a huge piece of work for someone, and not something that Cairngorms Connect is going to do. On a personal level, I would love to see it. I think it would, I think, we will always probably have to do deer control to some extent because of the situation we're in. But I think there would be lots of additional benefits to reintroducing large predators, which is not always, not everyone's opinion, obviously. So that is just my personal opinion. But yeah, a really interesting question. I'd be interested what you think, whether that's something you'd like to see as well. Or maybe that's too tricky. I can't. Oh no, there's the chat.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds a fascinating idea. And
yeah,
bears have been introduced in other parts of the country, of Britain. So maybe, yeah.
And there are, I think, it does feel really alien to think that we could share this landscape with these large predators, but throughout Europe and America and all right across the world, people are living with bears and wolves and wild cats. So there's a lot that we can learn from other countries, I think, as well, but it's just because we haven't had them for so long. It's a real, social and kind of psychological thing to wrap our heads around, which we're not there yet, but maybe in the future.
So all a question of scale, really, isn't it? And keeping things in proportion. But yeah, it would be fascinating.
Yeah.
Right. So we've got another question. What do you cover the bear peat with?
Yep. Really good question as well. So we use a variety of techniques, either taking sphagnum moss and vegetation from healthy areas where there's an abundance of it and bringing that over and pulling that over to cover up the exposed peat. We're also trialing some new methods which seem to be working, where bear peat is covered with this sort of knitted mesh made from coconut husks, which sounds a bit bonkers. I can share some photos of that as well, because it looks like this sort of big golden netting over exposed peat, but it's a useful kind of biodegradable, environmentally sustainable way of covering these large areas of bare peatland where we just don't have the available vegetation to put on top of it. So that seems to be working as well, which is quite a new technique. So we'll be reporting on how that works, but it seems to be working so far.
Okay, so we've got Helen is going to be visiting one of the 2 million
Excellent.
this year. Are local people and businesses on board with supporting this project? Yeah,
good question. That's something I spend a lot of time thinking on and working on. I would say in general, yes, local people and businesses are very supportive and on board. I think because we've got this quite extensive science and monitoring programme, which also includes monitoring the socioeconomic impact of the project, we've kind of got this data of, which I don't have in the top of my head, but of how many people locally support the project, what their opinions are of Cairngorms Connect, how that's changed over the span of the project's lifetime. And they've all been, majority positive. There are always some people who are never going to be on board with what we're doing. They want to see land managed in a different way. And from my perspective, that's acceptable, that if that's their opinion, that's fine, but that's not going to stop us doing what we're doing. And all we can do is kind of be honest and open with the work that we're doing and explain why we're doing it, and hopefully bring those people round without spending too much time focused on the kind of minority people who don't like what we do. Businesses, I think, definitely see the benefit of this work. The funding we've got from Endangered Landscapes Programme is $5 million over 5 years, and the majority of that is spent within 50 miles of the project area. So it's spent really locally. So it's a real, not only the kind of people we employ throughout the project, so the 60 full-time equivalent staff, but the money that we spend on contractors and equipment and goods and services and all that stuff that the $5 million gets spent on, is majority of that is spent locally as well. So for that reason, I think businesses are supportive, because it means more business for them in lots of ways. Yeah, and and like looking forward, though, we've got I mean, if you've been to the Cairngorms, you'll know there's loads of ecotourism and wildlife watching businesses and all that stuff, and all the nature here is only going to get better as the landscape restores. So they'll see, you know, to be able to take people out to, if we do ever get lynx or wolves, to have a look at them, or to have a look at beavers or some of the species that might come back, to have a look for blue throat. I think ecotourism will only grow as a business in the area as well, which is exciting. But yeah, good question.
Okay, so obviously down here with the Somerset levels, that was an area of peat extraction, which left all the bare areas. What was the cause of the bare peat in the Cairngorms?
Yeah, it's a variety of different things, really. Some areas were peat drainage for, trying to plant timber, so trying to drain peat. Some areas were not so much here. It's more kind of right in the north of Scotland where you see kind of peat extraction or that kind of stuff. That wasn't so much done here. Equally, the high deer numbers we have trample over the peatland and kind of churn up the vegetation and expose the peat. So the high deer numbers we have aren't great for peatlands. Some areas of peatland within the Cairngorms National Park are burned for grouse moor management, which I know the RSPB is doing a lot of work to talk about, so you might have already heard about that. But where peatlands burned to keep the heather low and to keep the vegetation low for grouse management, you also burn the peat and risk exposing the peat and degrading it even further. So a variety of things, none of them great, but yeah, we're doing a lot of work to restore the damage that's been done.
Can I just ask a supplementary question on that? What about farming? Were the Cairngorms farmed? Are there any farms there?
Yeah, so within the Cairngorms National Park, there's a lot of land that's farmed. Within the Cairngorms Connect area specifically, there's no land designated specifically for farming or agriculture, because it's all managed, especially for ecological restoration. We do work a lot with some local crofts who manage their land for agriculture. So, for example, Linbrett Croft, which is a local kind of small scale sustainable farm, and we work with them they butcher our venison and help us with our venison business. So we do work with local farms, but there are none within the Cairngorms Connect project area.
And were there any when the landowners that you've got now bought the land were?
It's a good question. For most of the partners, they've owned the land. So RSPB Abernethy's been owned by the RSPB for the last 60 years, Inchmarshes for the last 50. So it's quite a long time, and I'd have to check, but I believe they were bought as estates from existing landowners who managed them for deer or grouse. Right. I don't think they were farming, but I would have to double check that. That might not be right.
What about the reindeer? I remember camping up 50 odd years ago and seeing the reindeer.
Yeah, so we do. There are still the herd of free roaming reindeer up at Glenmore. That was my first experience with the Cairngorms as well, was being up and having a look at the reindeer. They're not, the reindeer centre isn't directly involved with the project. We do work with them to make sure, so the reindeer all wear these electronic tagging collars that track their movements. So we work with the reindeer centre just to make sure that the reindeers aren't all congregating in an area where we've just planted a load of downy willow or birch, because then the reindeer would eat all the tiny trees, which wouldn't be great. And they haven't so far, but we're in conversation with the reindeer centre to make sure that doesn't happen. But yeah, I think they're a lovely part of the area. I'm a fan.
So are the curlew, you talked about the curlew nesting at Inchmarshes, are there signs of recovery of bird breeding numbers there?
Off the top of my head, I can't remember. There's a project happening there at the moment called the Curlew Life, which is working to bring back more curlews. I don't know if they've published how they've done yet. I presume they seem, I think year on year, anecdotally, since I've been here, there've been more curlew each year, but I don't know the official data, but I can have a look and let you know. Yeah.
I think that's the chat room just about done. Has anybody else got any questions they'd like to discuss?
I ask about trees.
Oh, sorry, I've missed one. When you remove the timber, is that does that get what happens to the timber that you remove other than that left for?
Yeah. Yeah, so some of it's left in the forest. Anne mentioned. And the timber that's removed is sold. So particularly Forestry and Land Scotland, one of our partners, are able to make quite a lot of money from timber extraction, and that then goes back into funding our restoration work. Yeah.
Has anybody else got any questions?
Dark skies.
I was just curious from a slightly different point of view about dark skies events. Having visited there, it's absolutely magnificent at night. Do you get involved with dark sky events?
Yes, we did. There was one last year at Loch-Inch, which was, I can't remember what it was, organised by an external organisation, but they basically got everyone out. I mean, actually, it definitely wasn't a dark sky event because it was at night, but they got everyone out holding sort of handheld lights and creating these images, which from above they took photos of everyone above out on the loch and they're all holding lights. But that's not what you mean by dark skies, because there are, not within the Cairngorms Connect landscape, but just outside at Tom and Towel and Glenlivet are really good for night skies, for the aurora. Especially sort of at this time of year, and also just having a look at the stars. So we haven't done any specific events around dark skies. We've done some evening and night events. So we did a bat watching event at Loch-Inch, which was really popular, and we've done a couple of kind of evening yoga retreats kind of under the stars, which have been quite popular as well, but none specifically about the night sky, which might be a nice thing to explore. Yeah.